Welcome back to Senate Education. I'm pleased that we have two individuals from the Winooski School District with us this afternoon. And please correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name, which I'm sure I am. Ms. Colgard? Okay.
Yep, that's right.
Glad you're with us. Mr. Nirula?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Well, thanks so much for being with us. It means a lot to us. It's so great to hear from people who are on the ground working with families and children, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do so. What we're trying to understand, and I'm hoping we were clear in our description of what we would like, if not, that falls on me, but really trying to understand the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. The students, the kind of student you might interact with, the family, what happens not only in the school, but also share with us any work that might be happening outside of the school as well. So with that, I'm not, Ms. Colgard, you're on the list first. I don't know if you want to go together or however you want to work it. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. I hope that our presentation today will be helpful to you. We've got about 5 pages of written testimony and a PowerPoint. We plan to talk for about 10 minutes and leave about 10 minutes for questions. Does that sound okay?
That sounds fine. We need to close at 3:15.
Got it, 3:15. Okay. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Kirsten Colgard. I'm the director of the multilingual programs for the Winooski School District, and I'm here with one of my colleagues.
Good afternoon. I am TP Nirola. I am one of the multilingual liaison at the Winooski School District.
Great. So I'm going to get started and talk for just a minute, and then TP will be talking about the work the liaisons do and fill you in on a lot around our students and families, and then I'll follow up with some other points. So just to point you in the direction of the PowerPoint that I shared to start off with, I'm not going to go through all of it, but the first 2 slides, slide 2 and slide 3, give you kind of a general background of the total number of students and percentage of students who receive English language learner services at the school. This doesn't account for all of our students who are multilingual. We have more students who have exited the program whose families speak a language other than English at home. And then if you look at slide 3, that kind of shows you a general overview of the 17 different languages that are spoken in the school district and what our largest languages are. And then slides 4 through 8 sort of talk about our programming. I'm happy to answer questions about those, but we won't go into those too much right now. And then slide 9 talks about our different liaison supports, and slide 10 talks about our ESSER funded positions, which we'll be talking more about shortly. So really, the majority of our multilingual learners in the Winooski School District come to the U.S. through the refugee resettlement process through the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. This makes our community of multilingual learners incredibly diverse and unique. Refugee families come to the U.S. through incredibly challenging circumstances that most who are born in the U.S. cannot begin to comprehend. Their resiliency and bravery is astounding. And these families, they come to the U.S. after long, dangerous journeys to escape persecution in their home countries. And during their time in refugee camps, which may often be more than 20 years, there's typically limited access to schools, and many of the camp's girls may have been denied access to education, and resources and staffing were very minimal. These families come to the U.S. dedicated to giving their children a better life, and they know that at the core of that is for them to get a good education. These multilingual families need additional support that might not be traditionally thought of in many U.S. public schools.
One of the most important aspects of our multilingual program is our multilingual liaison team. I am a member of that 8-person team. We have 8 multilingual liaisons and a district. When multilingual families resettle at Winooski School District, one of the biggest challenges they encounter is a language barrier when interacting with any organization outside of their homes. Many of our families are not literate in their native language, because they were denied educational opportunities as part of the persecution they faced in their home countries. As a result, parents need a lot of support navigating resources in their new communities. The Liaison support families and students from the very beginning. As students settle into their new school, Liaison provide a wide variety of support to them, including academic tutoring, native language and English support, behavior management, and social emotional support. Often the refugee resettlement experience has been traumatic, and our students need support processing those experiences and moving forward. This work builds a sense of community for the students and makes them feel safe, loved, and able to learn. In addition, the adults who work with our multilingual students at Winooski School District need to understand their students well to be able to best educate them. The liaisons provide cultural presentation to staff regularly about the culture and history of the students they work with. This education is essential for our predominantly white US-born staff to help them truly understand and connect with our students. In addition to the wide variety of ways they support students, our liaison provide critical support to our multilingual families as well. For a new multilingual family, their children's school is the place where they most consistently interact with US culture and system outside the home. Multilingual parents often tell us that teachers are their children's second parents and that they appreciate how much teachers do to support their children. In many ways, they view the school as an extension of their family, and teachers and liaison are the people they look to for support in navigating their new community, culture, and language. Liaison support families with school-related paperwork and other paperwork that is essential to our students having their basic needs met, which enable them to come to school ready to learn. Liaison work tirelessly each day to register students and sign them up for school activities, field trips, summer camp, after school athletics, the school-based health clinic, and dental programs. Additionally, during the COVID pandemic, the needs of our multilingual families increased substantially. The ongoing shift in testing and quarantining policy need to be shared out with our school community in different languages by the liaisons. Families have ongoing questions and concerns that we need to address. In addition to our regular work, we have become COVID experts for the community, addressing all types of questions and concerns, and regularly translating and recording voice, message, and video updates to their language communities. This year, we have added 3 new liaison positions with temporary ESSER funds. As a result, our liaisons have been able to start going into mainstream classrooms more to provide cultural education to all students. They read bilingual books in their native languages and share presentation about their cultures. This work helps multilingual students feel more included and seen in their classrooms. Well, it also supports all students in gaining cultural competence and promoting cross-cultural understanding. Before we had these new positions, there were years when I had 140 Nepali-speaking students on my caseload. It was really hard to support that number of students and families.
Mr. Newell, I'm sorry. Did you say 140?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, before the new position were created, I worked around with 140 Nepali-speaking students and families on my caseload. It was really hard to support that number of students and families. I regularly worked extra hours and received phone calls at all hours of the day and night to support families. This year, since we have hired another Nepali-speaking liaison with temporary ESSER funds, my work has become less hectic, and together we are providing more support for students and families.
Thanks, TP. So I just have to reiterate that trying to think about this testimony, the work that TP and the other liaisons do, we couldn't possibly include all of it. They do so much to support our school systems and help us run smoothly and have strong family engagement. Because one of the other pieces that's a barrier to new multilingual families coming into the US is that US systems can be really complicated, as you all know. And learning US systems is something that we work at Winooski, we work hard to support families with so that they can be more independent and better advocate for their children. Our multilingual teachers and liaisons are supporting students with figuring out scholarships for, college, for summer camps, running summer programming, or volunteering to register and drive students to community-based sports leagues. Without these supports, many multilingual students would be left out of any non-essential programming, as their parents do not have the language literacy and advocacy skills to navigate the complex systems that we as native-born English speakers often take for granted. So this year, as TP was talking about, we've added several new positions with the temporary ESSER funds in order to more adequately support these students and families. And one of these positions is our multilingual learner intake and family engagement educator, whose work her work has greatly improved our intake process and our family engagement system. Working in partnership with the liaisons, she's been able to offer parent English classes, technology classes, and monthly workshops on a range of topics that address the complex educational system in the US. In these interpreted workshops, families are learning about Winooski's proficiency-based learning system, the college admissions process, financial aid, the state's early college program, different technical and career pathway programs, and many other resources that are more accessible to native-born English speakers. Currently, culturally, these systems are dramatically different from the ones in many of our families' native countries. So they need support in navigating them and need multiple opportunities to learn about them. The complexities of these systems, along with the differences in culture and language, means that it takes a lot more time and more people to support multilingual families with navigating these systems. We need more guidance counselors and liaisons to provide adequate support for these students. And as we've been talking about, we mentioned some of the multilingual liaison and teacher positions that we've added with the temporary ESSER funds. You can see them listed on slide 10 of the PowerPoint. And we know that using these, soft funds that are going to go away in a few years is taking a big risk to add positions using these funds. But we also knew that these positions were really necessary in order to continue developing a strong and supportive program for our multilingual students. Over the past decade, we've built a really strong program by adding several locally funded multilingual liaison and teacher positions at a pace that taxpayers could support. But to adequately support the needs of our community, we needed these additional positions to build capacity and reduce extremely high caseloads. So if the pupil weights are not adjusted, we may have to cut some or all of these positions within the next couple of years as the ESSER funding ends, which would increase caseloads and disadvantage students and families who are currently benefiting from better support. Winooski School District has a demonstrated track record and commitment to creating inclusive educational programs that are responsive to all of our students' needs. We're a district that's always focused on the students and thought outside the box to come up with innovative, locally funded programming. We take a whole school approach to budgeting and developing programming. Examples of that are our commitment to funding year-round busing and expanding our pre-K program in next school year's budget. There are programs that our multilingual families have advocated for, but they'll also help support all of our students and families. Adjusting the pupil weights allows for maximum flexibility in how we use funds to support all of our students and to build the inclusive programming our students need. Categorical aid can lead to unnecessary siloing of students, as those funds are only allowed to be spent on students who qualify for EL services. I'd like to share an example of categorical aid that has proven challenging for us in Winooski. And that's the Refugee School Impact Grant that we receive from the Vermont Agency of Human Services each year. This grant's funding is inconsistent year to year, as it's based on the number of refugee students that we have each year. And that can vary dramatically based on external geopolitical forces, making it hard.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but where did this categorical grant come from again? Is this a state grant?
Yes, it's a state grant. It's it comes through the Agency of Human Services.
Thank you.
Yep. And so it's it can vary year to year, which makes it hard to sustain long-term programming and to write things into the grant that we can count on from year to year. Additionally, in the past, this categorical aid has had a stipulation that it could not be used to serve any student who had been in the U.S. longer than exactly 3 years. So trying to create programming for only students who fit that criteria was really challenging because it disregarded actual student need, and it left out a significant number of children who could have benefited from programs, but had been in the U.S. too long to qualify. The restrictions that categorical aid places on districts, along with the inconsistent funding year to year, makes it hard for districts to plan long-term and build supportive programming. We hope that you'll consider our testimony and adjust the pupil weights to adequately fund school districts with multilingual learners, so we can develop equitable and inclusive programs that have strong outcomes for all of our students. So thank you for the time, and we'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
It was great testimony. Thank you both very much for being here. I know, two of your senators are with us today, Senators Chittenden and Lyons. Committee questions, comments for our witnesses. Senator Lyons.
So I do have a question, and obviously it sounds like I know you've reached out for a very broad community support system at Winooski, and I've been to the school many different times and appreciate the work that you're doing. I guess my question is this: is there anything that you are doing that might be better done or could be done by the municipality, by the town of Winooski, or by others in the community? And I'm asking that because there are some people who believe that might be the case, and I include within that the refugee resettlement program.
That's a good question. And I mean, I think there are, when working with multilingual families and families who've been resettled as refugees, there's a number of needs that they have that go beyond maybe your traditional scope of when you're thinking about a middle-class English speaker. And so, refugee resettlements has like their own kind of like restrictions around how long they can fund and support newly resettled families. And I think in a perfect world, if we could, extend that funding, for the refugee resettlement sites and be able to offer longer term support, for new families resettling, that would certainly be a help. And then as far as the municipality and Winooski, we've been able to really partner with the city for a lot of things. And the city is, TP and some of the other liaisons actually contract with the city now to do a lot of equity and outreach work with their communities. And the city, Winooski City, is really, taken over and trying to do more of that outreach. And I think probably TP could speak to a little of that himself.
Yeah, as Kirsten said, we actually coordinated with the city, and they agreed to work with almost all the liaisons at Winooski. So we have been helping parents with a lot of other paperwork other than the schools, like food stamp paperwork, housing paperwork. And also we have been setting a lot of meetings in the evenings, as well as the parents, families flexible time, so that a lot of parents could join the meeting. I know a lot of things are not going accordingly what we planned because of pandemic, but in future, still we hope to do a lot of meetings with our parents and give a lot of information about the culture and how the system works in the school, how the system works with the city, and how our parents are able to access to different resources in the community, the college and career, the health and medical, Medicaid, still, like, we have a lot of things to go in future.
It is complicated, but thank you for that. And I do know how closely Winooski, the city of Winooski, is working with the school, and it's a whole community. I do have one other question. It's just a short. Did you present this information to the waiting task force? Did you have a chance to testify?
We did not testify to the waiting task force as individuals. Other members of our educational community, like Superintendent Sean McMahon and our finance manager, Nicole Mace, presented to them.
Okay. But in terms of the comprehensive nature of the testimony that Sean and Nicole gave, do you feel that it was comparable to what you have shared with us about the programming?
Yes, I think, they did kind of a little bit of a broader overview of programs and the physical impact, of the weights. We're getting into a little bit more of the nitty gritty of the work that the liaisons and that, that our teachers have done in this presentation.
Thank you.
Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And thank you both for being here. This is really informative. My question has to do with the difference between your district, which has so many ELL students, and other districts that have so few. And can you just address the concept? I mean, we're looking at categorical grants that say, okay, you have this many students, we'll give you the money that you need to accommodate them, regardless of the numbers. Why is it different? Why do you think that isn't adequate for educating or for serving these multilingual learners?
So, I think that you've been talking about looking at a hybrid model, correct? Where you might be looking at weighting for some districts versus categorical aid for others, because for lower, smaller multilingual populations, that might be the way to go for those smaller communities. But for, larger multilingual communities like Winooski and Burlington, we're talking about, around 35% of our students are actively receiving services as multilingual learners or English language learners, and close to 50% of our students speak languages other than English at home. So when you're looking at that type of community, like, that's our community, we're really, when we're doing things to support our multilingual learners, we're serving all of our students. The busing and the preschool are an example. So when the funding is added in as weights, it allows us to be able to develop stronger programs and more inclusive programs that support all students and look at, our entire community and what their needs are as a whole, as opposed to with categorical aid. It tends to be these students are receiving these services and we need to create this program over here, that only supports these students. Whereas when it's a weighted system, we're able to think more about, like, what are the needs of all of our students? And we're still looking at, like, specific, what specific academic needs are, what specific language needs are, but we're not kind of held into the box that categorical aid can put us in, where we have to focus, specifically on eligibility criteria and kind of those, specific, like, what time spent with which teachers, which can really happen with categorical aid. And it's one of the nice things about Winooski, I feel like, is that we are a community who really recognizes, the strengths of all of our students and tries to encourage students themselves to celebrate their strengths. That's kind of like a couple examples of that are, what TP was talking about liaisons being able to go in classrooms more, not just to support multilingual learners, but to support all learners. Another piece of that is just how you probably noticed I'm using the term multilingual learner. We've shifted to that from English language learner because it's much more of a strengths-based approach. Describing a student as an English language learner is describing what they need to do. What, like, more of a deficit model of that they need to be learning English. Whereas talking about them as a multilingual learner is talking about who they are and celebrating that strength, that diversity of language and culture that they bring to our community. And that's where we see, looking at changing the weights as being really supportive to keeping that model going forward of that, we are a multilingual community, all of us together, and we're creating programming that supports all students and families.
Yeah, and also I think we need like more support and more services to our parents too, because I know sometimes what happens, like when I translate some documents and send it in my own language to the parents, still, I think 50 to 60% of our parents, they are not able to read even our own language. So that's the reason like why we need like extra liaison in our school district, to give like individual support, not as a whole. We need to give some to some of the families like individual support.
Senator Chittenden.
Thank you for this testimony, and I share your concerns with siloing dollars through categorical aid approaches, where it can create those inefficiencies and also administrative burden. I would ask, it's similar to that vein and to the line of questioning Senator Lyons asked. Do you see where dollars going to our schools are equally being siloed, where we as the legislature should be looking at making sure that supports for communities, multilingual communities in Vermont, have the physical spaces they need, either in the school or outside the school, the technology they need, the software that might be also necessary, as well as you spoke to transportation. Do you have any concerns from your lens within the school that we are siloing the dollars within the school district, not being able to adequately serve the whole community in Winooski?
TP, do you want to answer that?
You're muted. There you go.
Yeah. And it's a very good question, and I don't think I'd be able to give all the answers. I basically know like our parents, like since we came from a different environment, different situation, and people have come across torture and trauma back to their country. So they sometimes people, especially like they look us as a community leader, and then they always wanted us to advocate for them. So many times concerns and questions they bring to me, to all the liaisons. And one of the main reason and main concern is the transportation that Kirsten talked about. Although Winooski is a small town, we are like more about like 1 mile away from the school. Our parents think like, because many of our students are absent during winter times. So they have also requested, since we came from a very hot country, so snow and the ice, and parents feel like our children become sick during winter time. So many times parents, they ask for transportation, especially they have asked for winter, but even like some of them ask for the whole school year round. And Kirsten, you can go ahead with other points.
As far as like siloing funds within the school, I mean, I think that overall we do a really good job of developing programming that supports all students. The Title III funding, which is our kind of our ELL funding through the Consolidated Federal Programs Grant that comes from the Agency of Education. There are definitely, stipulations around that require that the money be spent on, actively serviced English language learners. And so sometimes what happens is some of our summer programming winds up being specifically for ELL students, which and sometimes is appropriate, right? Because if you're working on specific like language acquisition and things, it's important to have kind of that group of students who's working on similar things. But I feel like we've kind of, when we have some programming that is purely ELL for summer programming, we also have like inclusive programming for all of our elementary students, where students are all in that summer programming together. So we try to, in ways like that, make sure that if we are doing programming that's, for a specific group of our multilingual learners, that we're making sure that we're also, adding on other programming that's inclusive and making sure that we have, are supporting all students together.
I just like to,
I'm sorry to
share.
interrupt for a second. I just want to, we're a little bit tight on time. Senator Perslick, did you want to ask something related to this?
No, I could, but if TP has more to say,
Okay, go ahead,
welcome
Mr.
to
Newell.
Yeah, thank you. I just had the experience last time during like remote learning days when many of our students learning remotely from home. A lot of our multilingual family and children, I think remote is not an option for our students. This is what I thought. So I even work tirelessly to set up the meeting on Zoom and ask the students to, and many of our parents and also students, like they were not familiar with the computer and they are not skills doing stuff on the computer or iPad. So, and also many of our parents, they did not have good internet at home, just like they had internet essentials, which is a $10 internet. So it was very slow. So education did not happen. Our children did not learn during remote learning days.
Final questions or comments? This has been very helpful to give us a sense of what's happening on the ground in your work. I really appreciate the two of you coming in. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you both very much. We may have you back, but if not, our committee, I suspect finance will have you back as they dig into whatever our recommendation ends up being. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Committee, now we are shifting to S-139. Senator McCormick is with us, who introduced the bill. To say a few words, we already have started taking a little testimony on it, but Senator McCormick, want to give us a little background, the genesis of the bill and some other ideas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and committee, thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. For the record, I'm Senator Richard McCormick, though since my grandfather died, no one calls me that. I'm Dick McCormick, representing Windsor County and the towns of Mount Holly and Londonderry. I am the chief sponsor of Senate Bill 139, which addresses school mascots. 139 prohibits public schools from using ethnic or racial groups as mascots. Why should we do this? First, because it is insulting and demeaning for one group to use another group as its mascot. It is an exercise in one group's power over another group. It is demeaning to the mascotted group. Please note, I said mascot, not insulting mascot, because simply making someone a mascot is insulting in and of itself. But of course, an insultingly stereotypical mascot is extra insulting. While no one should be demeaned or insulted because of his or her race or ethnicity, this is especially true of public school students. Every child in Vermont has a constitutional right to a public education. It is unconscionable for a student who is of a marginalized group to be subjected to humiliation as the price of accessing that constitutional right. Second, it is a well-established constitutional principle that while government may delegate authority, it may not delegate responsibility. For centuries, the Vermont state government has delegated its authority over education to local communities, and Vermonters are justly protective of those powers, those delegated powers. But those powers are delegated by the state. And the state is ultimately still responsible for seeing to it that our schools are properly run. This is not about state power versus local power. It is about the state's duty to protect the rights of the children of Vermont. Third, Citizenship training and character development are not only a legitimate part of public education, they are original purposes, going back through Horace Mann to Thomas Jefferson. Mascots not only hurt members of the insulted groups, they hurt majority kids as well by creating the false impression that disrespect is acceptable. We should be teaching our kids, including white kids, to respect their fellow human beings, their fellow Americans, their fellow Vermonters, and their schoolmates. I'm familiar with the arguments against this initiative. I've already spoken to the state's duty in the matter. This is not a legislative overreach or an abuse of local control. I also hear that we should respect the will of the majority if a community votes to insult students of color. But an injustice is not made just by the tyranny of the majority. I hear that mascots are traditions about which alumni feel deeply. No doubt this is true. But nostalgic school pride is a lesser concern in my view, and I hope in yours, than decency towards our kids. I've heard that supporters of demeaning mascots mean no harm, may even intend the mascots as tributes. To those aggrieved alumni, I say, this isn't about you. It's about the innocent people you're demeaning and insulting. To deliberately insult is a sin of commission, but to ignore the objections of those being insulted is a sin of omission. I suggest this bill makes sense and we should simply stop insulting our kids. I do thank the committee for hearing from me. I really hope that you will hear from others, in particular from Vermont's indigenous people. There are Abenakis in our state. They are organized politically. They have leaders, designated leaders. I would hope that you would hear from them. You may hear from a group called Native American, I forget, NAGA, who purport to speak for Native Americans and say that they really kind of like the mascots. I would hope that you would look into their actual background and see who they're actually speaking for. And meanwhile, hear from our own indigenous people. There's also an organization in Vermont, which is part of a national organization called More Than a Mascot. And I would hope that you would hear from them as well. I have sent the committee a list of resources and would be happy to talk with anyone who's interested in that. And if there are questions or comments,
Thank you. Thank you, Senator McCormick. Appreciate you taking the lead on this and appreciate you taking the time to come down to be with us today. Senator Chittenden.
Senator McCormick, I have to say thank you for introducing this bill, and I am generally supportive of doing something on this topic. I am, as I told this committee, I am very close to a very controversial topic from 4 years ago, South Burlington Rebel fight. And so the fight over that mascot really tore our community apart. And I think there is a clear argument that the legislature should play a hand in this. I have two comments about your bill that I would love to hear your reaction to if you have time. One, we have heard from the superintendents, from the principals, from the school board representatives, the NEA, that they really want us to just give a break to our school communities with as little legislation as possible this session in order to let them catch their breath. So that's one pause I have in implementing this. I see you have the 3-year thing, but I'd love to hear what your reaction to that is. And the second piece is, I'm looking at a list of all of the mascots throughout the great state of Vermont. I like your language, and I think addressing the Native American peoples is important, but I don't know if that will necessarily resolve other conflicts that happen with mascots, like the Rebels. I'm looking at the Minutemen, the Mounties, the Marauders. There are 3 towns of the Raiders, the Galloping Ghosts. Do you have any other thoughts on broadening this and finding a way? The crazy notion I put forward is if we just required every high school to choose an animal, like wolves, bears, and so on. Any thoughts on that?
Of course, probably if someone chooses an animal, someone might object to that, I suppose. But no, I have always said I'm a big picture guy. I leave the details to staff. I also feel that a bill as introduced is a first draft. And I have no proprietary possessiveness. I guess that's what proprietary means. I do not feel possessive about the specific language or provisions of the bill. I know that, for example, the Principals Association testified before your committee that they are not interested, or at least are not eager to be to enforce a provision such as in this bill. I would not mind it going to perhaps the State Board of Education. And similarly, one of our colleagues mentioned to me that there's a team in the state who are the Bob Whites, which are actually named after a man. Because Bob White is a kind of bird, but in fact, it was a way of naming it after someone they wanted to honor. And the bill says no particular person. So, I mean, I guess my answer, Senator, is that's your problem. I have presented the issue, and I have presented a bill that seeks to address it. And if you want to clean up my details, I'm more than happy to cooperate.
Senator Perchlik.
Well, thank you. And I think the answer to that question would kind of answers my question, because it's kind of about the wording and how we deal with figuring out, it's very clear with the chieftains that should change and would be a violation of the bill. It's harder when you get to the Thunderbirds. You really have to kind of see, like, are they doing that with a bunch of Native American imagery, or are they doing it with like Air Force airplanes, and what's the history and things like that? So who figures that out and how that's figured out? I wondered if you had been drafting this up, looked, because the state of Maine has passed the bill. We heard, I didn't know if any of this language was crafted with those thinking about those kind of issues, but it seems like
being of a certain age. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. Okay, being of a certain age, when you say Thunderbird, I picture the sports car, which I always wished I had. Yeah, I think one thing that the committee will want to do is to look not only at what is the intention of the people choosing the image, but what does it do to people who are affected by it? And just to give you an example, years and years ago, in the 70s, I was shocked to find out that a town in Vermont, not far from where I live in Bethel, had an annual minstrel show, which they did blackface. And as disturbing as that was to me, what was more disturbing was my neighbors who reassured me, "Oh, Dick, they don't mean nothing by it." And my answer to them was, that has nothing to do with this. I don't care what they mean. It's a bad thing to do. There are people who wave the Confederate flag who say, when I wave the Confederate flag, I don't mean it to celebrate slavery. That's not how I intended. And, the answer is, well, if I raise my middle finger to you and just say, I mean this in only the nicest way, it's still an insulting gesture. And by saying, well, I don't mean it that way, you're taking it wrong, I think gives me too much power and takes power away from the person I'm insulting. And so too, I would hope that if someone innocently chooses the Thunderbirds, and then it turns out that there's a class of people in the community who experience that as an attack or as demeaning, that if one wishes you didn't need this bill or the law, one wishes that people would just on their own say, okay, well, as a courtesy to our neighbors, we'll change the name. But the idea that people have a right to accidentally insult people if they feel okay about it, I think troubles me, and I don't know about others. I've often said that, the kind of new agey psychobabble of the 70s and 80s, which we often associate with progressive people, but I've always said, even when it was current, saying this is going to come back to bite us someday, because how I feel is not dispositive. How I feel about something is not the important issue. What the action is the issue.
Senator McCormick, I did read, excuse me, Maine's bill over the weekend. Theirs seems just very more narrow. In other words, they are specifically looking to make certain that the names of Native and Indigenous peoples are not used in as mascots. So we'll take a look at that. Under your bill, what would happen to a sporting group called the Pilgrims?
Well, I'm not sure who would feel demeaned by that. I don't quite make pilgrim ancestry. My ancestors showed up on my father's mother's side in the 1630s. Woodstock has the wasps, although I think they're talking about the bees, not the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
I'm just predicting. I'm predicting the floor conversation, and I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pilgrims would fall, I think, into your group. I mean, so I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering. You know, that kind of.
Yeah.
That's that kind of. I'm not making a judgment whether or not the Pilgrims should be or shouldn't be a mascot. I'm thinking again of the floor conversation, and I'm wondering if maybe we tailor this, make it a little bit more narrowed. The other way for us to take a look at this might be, as I think it was Senator Chittenden read out, has reviewed a number of the names. Maybe it is the state board that really does an in-depth review and make certain requests. You know, they could spend the time, and they may say, hey, after examination, we feel that these 7 school districts should have an analysis and rethink their mascot. That might be another way to do it, and then give them a period of a couple of years to do that. It might take some of the pressure off of local school boards to go into this kind of assessment. In other words, again, who knows?
I understand that. I would just hope, again, to say that the focus should always be on the children who are perhaps insulted and demeaned.
Yeah, in the state board,
there is on my list of resources that includes experts on the psychology of such humiliation. I did also want to mention, speaking of the Pilgrims, I got a very angry email from a woman who pointed out my last name, and then pointed out the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. And I asked myself, okay, why am I not offended by that? Well, one of the reasons is that Notre Dame is an Irish identified institution with a lot of people who are Irish identified, including their football team, who named themselves the Fighting Irish. And similarly, there are native schools. I don't know if there are in Vermont, but out in America, there are native schools who refer to themselves, indigenous, who refer to themselves by their tribal name and so on. That's not one group making a mascot of someone else. So the Minnesota Vikings, again, well, it's Minnesota. It's a place full of people of Scandinavian ancestry. They were sort of celebrating their own identity.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
As
Senator
opposed to
Chittenden.
one.
Yep. I just want to.
To your point, Chair Campion, I wonder, and maybe Senator Perchlik has some thoughts on this, but I'm pretty sure DMV has pretty well-crafted rules about license plates, and I don't think that was legislatively defined. I think, like to your point, with that administrative agency was empowered to come up with those rules. And
I
think
like that.
Comparable here.
I would like kids of color, indigenous kids, to not be insulted. And however we can achieve that, I do think statute is more powerful than administrative rules. And I would just reiterate yet again, we need to keep our focus on the kids who are being treated badly, as opposed to the people doing the treating.
Absolutely. Yeah. Senator Hooker, final question.
Thank you. Just a comment. Here's another
Please.
area that we could do some education in. And I would hope that whatever we do with this bill would include an educational piece. Look back at the history of these mascots. Where did they come from?
Yeah, it's a great point. Great point. Senator McCormick, thank you very much. We'll let you go back to Senate Appropriations, where we know you're doing good work for students as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senate
Committee. No,
Institutions. Thank you.
Not only have I been demoted from institutions, I've been exiled to the old boys committee.
Aha.
Thank you for giving me.
Wherever you go in the afternoon, we will let you get back there. Thank you so much
for giving me a
being
couple
with
of
us.
minutes away. Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Committee, just take a quick stretch, 2 minutes, and we'll come right back and finish up. I know there's a chairs meeting